Smith-Becker. I'm with Public Works, Calvers County.
My name is Lori Parker, and I'm a realty specialist with the Corps, but I was involved in this project many years ago as the planner. I'm now a realty specialist.
And I've got two more guys with me.
Rob Thompson, I'm a hydrologist.
John Keller, hydraulic engineer with the Corps.
Okay, and then Ed Hassan, CWD,
The water resource manager, helping the Corps and the county.
and Dave Andrus also.
And I'm the general manager of CCWD.
And Furnace.
It's good to be invisible. We're deciding public works.
And then I did notice that we have a county supervisor.
We've got two.
Gary
A
Calvert,
couple of them.
District 1 Supervisor, Maria Calorie, District 3 Supervisor.
Otherwise known as Seven Supremacy.
Phil Holcomb, Operations Manager, blank.
Did I miss anything? Oh, and Jeff Davidson, hiding over there. Okay, basically, we're going to go over the, we're starting the feasibility study, so we're going to go over the planning basics and some other things through this. Basically, you just met the project delivery team from the Corps, and we're cost sharing this with Calaveras County, who also has an MOU with CCWD, and we're all working together to make this come together. And our effort is to prepare a feasibility report to get authorized, to show the federal interest in an authorized project to get the flood risk management going on this creek. And that is the new term now, is flood. It's not flood control, it's not flood damage reduction, it's flood risk management. That's what the Corps has changed it to. And we did, as Lori attested to, we did a recon study a few years ago. Unfortunately, the program had funding cuts in Congress, so we had to delay getting to this point. But now we've got funding for the feasibility part. We've got all the funding for the feasibility part, so we can move forward through this part of the process. And we're going to be looking at the alternatives that we looked at that time and other alternatives that we hear from you, the community, especially those of you in the know. And we will look at them more in depth than we did during the recon process. And this is not in any way, shape, or form dealing with the maintenance issues on the creek. This is the flood risk management part of that. Because I know a lot of you folks were also at the maintenance meeting last month. I recognize a lot of you from that meeting. But this is the long-term solution for the flooding problems on the creek. The federal participation is that we do have the authority through legislation from Congress. This falls under Section 205 of one of the Flood Control Acts. And like I said, that provision has been changed over the years. We do have to go through the NEPA process, which is dealing with the Endangered Species Act and environmental things and such as that. The state equivalent is CEQA, which we also have to meet their requirements. And we'll talk about the policy and planning parameters for the study document. That's Martin's area of expertise. The environmental is Hillary's area of expertise. And we're here to listen to your comments and concerns and questions and address them wherever possible. And this is where I turn it over to Martin.
Thank you. My name is Martin Gonzalez again. I'm not from California, I'm from Florida. But we have similar issues down in Florida also. As Beth mentioned, we did a recon, or Sacramento District did a recon a few years ago, and demonstrated federal interest in this effort. And what we're going to do now is, now that we have some funding, is to go ahead and kick off our Section 205 study. And basically, a lot of what I might say might be boring, but for federal participation to exist and for the monies to come forward for construction, we have to prepare a document, a decision document that says this is the best plan for this particular area. It will resolve these problems. It costs this much, and this is our benefit to cost ratio. So it is a good, worthwhile problem for you to approve and give us money for it. So there's a certain amount of protocol that's required within these documents, and that's largely my responsibility to ensure that it's done so that we do get an easy review from division, and we get the least amount of problems and headaches, and we can move a little bit faster with getting things done. I want to start off talking about the authority. It's a Section 205. It's an Old Flood Control Act. Basically, it allows the Secretary of the Army to the Chief of Engineers to plan, design, construct certain water resource projects without additional congressional approval. And that's the real beauty of this particular effort, is that we don't have to appease anyone other than division. We don't have to take this for some of the larger efforts that we have to the Everglades Restoration Project in Florida. We have to go through Congress, which can add years to appropriation of monies. We just have to appease our division. And the cost share is 65% federal, not to exceed $7 million. And there is a national limit for this continuing authorities program of $50 million. And what's important about these two bullets is, first of all, the program is capped. If we had a recommended plan that costed $20 million, it doesn't mean we can't do it, but the federal participation would be limited to $7 million. So that's an important thing to note. And the national limit for cap, what's important about that is that for everyone to recognize that we have to do a really good job with the document and the planning, what we do. And the reason is that this particular program is nationwide. So we are actually competing. When we finish a document, we're going to be competing with everyone in the nation who had a similar authority, who had a similar issue, and who had prepared a similar document. And they will have different, what we call, you'll find out later about BC ratios, its benefit to cost. So the better our BC ratio, the better our chances of getting this particular project within that appropriation. Okay, these are some basic requirements of the document and the authority. I mentioned earlier the sponsor will provide 35% of project costs. And if we have a project that's recommended that looks really great and it costs more, the sponsor would be having to provide the additional monies above the 35%, above the 65% that the federal government has. We have to prepare a detailed project report. That's a title given to this document. It's basically a feasibility level. And what that means is that we would finish this document and we would have sufficient information with which to proceed, once you get the money, to go ahead and get plans and specs and design done. So we would move from this particular feasibility study into the plans and specs phase. We have to demonstrate in this document that the project is economically justified. In other words, the benefits have to be much greater than the costs by above 1.0. That's the only requirement we have. The reality of life is that when you're competing with half the world, the higher your BC ratio, the much better your chances of someone saying, hey, this is a much better effort. We can get more bang for our buck. The document has to reaffirm the federal interest. Federal interest was established in RECON. That's why we got the monies to move forward. We have to reestablish that in the document. That NED is an acronym. It means National Economic Development. What we have to do is make sure, and I'm not an economist. We do have an economist on our team, but he's not able to come today. And our resulting alternative plan that we select must meet national economic development needs. And we have to comply with NEPA. Hillary, as the environmental lead, will largely monitor that we are meeting NEPA environmental concerns, addressing. Okay, this is just I wanted to tell you what NEPA was. It's a federal law, and it requires the federal agencies to consider all the environmental impacts of the proposed effort, where the federal government is going to provide some dollars. And if it in fact has a significant effect on the quality of the human environment. We are, I think we'll move on forward also. a little bit about the differences later. We're going to be doing what's called, we're hoping to do an environmental assessment, which is a form of NEPA. The NEPA goals, these are our goals. We want to make sure we consider all the environmental consequences of a federal action before we make that decision. And we want to solicit and consider public views on the proposed actions, and this is our kickoff start to that. This is in no way the end of it, this is just the start. And we want to make sure that we provide government agencies, such as Fish and Wildlife Service, with a common mechanic to coordinate overlapping, it's a little complicated, jurisdictional responsibilities. In other words, Fish and Wildlife Service does have a say in what we're going to do here, because they have responsibilities for wetlands and for streams. So the NEPA provides us the ability to be able to work together as federal agencies. EA, this is what I mentioned earlier, was what we're going to do. It's called an environmental assessment. It's brief. It documents that we have just enough to determine that we have hopefully not negatively impacted the environment with our federal project. The result of that is, just so, this might be a little boring, but FONSI is an acronym for Finding No Significant Impact. It's kind of an official statement that the likely colonel for Sacramento District will sign off saying that this project has no significant environmental impacts and can move forward. And EIS, the EIS is what they call an environmental impact statement. It takes a lot longer to do, and the reason it takes longer is it's because it's extremely controversial effort. We generally start our efforts with the assumption that we won't have it. So in this case, we're starting with assuming we're going to have an EA. If we get into an EIS, it means that we have so many controversial issues that things have to take longer, more public involvement, more scrutiny. But we're hoping that this will work as an environmental assessment. Mitigation is an important term to know. The reason I placed this one up here is that it doesn't, we're not supposed to adversely impact the environment. It doesn't mean that there might not be some impacts based on a particular plan. But we may decide, well, this plan is great, but it has a few bad parts to it. Then we need to decide whether or not those bad parts can be mitigated. In other words, if you have a great, awesome plan, but it gets rid of 5 acres of very good habitat of a species, we may be able, we have to consult Fish and Wildlife Service, but they may be able to say, well, we'll build similar habitat here, another 10 acres here, because we recognize we're getting rid of these 5. That's what mitigation would mean in a project. Okay, this is the 6-step planning process. We have to follow these 6 steps and demonstrate these 6 steps in our document. We first identify the problem and call out opportunities. We note existing and future without project conditions. The future without project conditions is a very important statement, because in the federal world, the decisions on whether or not a plan is good is based on how that plan in the future compares to the future without that plan. In other words, we don't compare, when we do our comparison of the plans, we don't compare it with the existing conditions. We compare it with what we expect will be in the future. Then we formulate various plans. If you see jargon around there that says management measures, what those are just features that we decide might be really good features to put into a plan. And we have a collection of those, and we might play with a couple of different combinations. Then once we get the plans together, we evaluate those plans, we compare them. Evaluation meaning we use, whatever tools we had, like for flood control, flood risk management. For flood risk management, we would probably have some model runs that indicate what levels of what areas were flooded or not. And we would evaluate and compare those plans, and then we select an alternative plan to move forward. Those are just generics of what I spoke of. Specifically, this is the problem that at least we understand today is going on with Cosflood Creek. That the The incidence and level of damages caused by the existing periodic flooding of homes and businesses along the lower third of Cosflood Creek is increasing. Urbanization of the area is making the problem worse. The periodic flooding also causes stream bank erosion, resulting in excessive sedimentation downstream, which this excessive sedimentation is not good for the environment that we're preparing for. So that's our problem statement. Okay, the following are the study parameters, and this is again part of that planning process that we have to put in the document to appease federal interest. Is we have to have our goal. So our goal is to reduce the damages to both property owners and the natural system that are adversely impacted by the periodic flooding events along Cosflood Creek. That's the goal for our project. And these are objectives. Objectives come out of that goal, and what we're going to do with these objectives is demonstrate through these objectives that we have met our goal. And we're going to demonstrate this in the document, and we're going to start probably one of the things to do. We need to attenuate damaging peat flows. Another thing that we want to accomplish, these are things we want to accomplish. Stabilize the creek banks. We want to improve the natural conditions that are favorable to wetlands and riparian habitat. And we want to increase potential for recreational opportunities as well. Constraints. Constraints is stuff that we can't do. The federal government can't do these things. When we come up with a plan, we cannot make adverse impacts to the environment. I put that in parentheses to include cultural resources, unless these are considered minor and can be mitigated, which is what I talked about earlier. If it's something that's not really huge and Fish and Wildlife Service says okay, or the state, what we call the SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Officer says, well, it's okay, we can move them or do something. We can adversely impact, but they have to be minor. We have to be able to mitigate for them. We can also not adversely impact existing levels of flood damage reduction within the study area without appropriate compensation. And what that means is that you could have an alternative plan, maybe, and several plans that talks to, well, yeah, we recognize that, say, these 3 acres are being getting more water than they would without the project. But the landowner may be willing to do, say, an easement. Say, well, I'll let you flood it, and you give me X dollars, and you can do this. That's what I meant by without appropriate compensation. And that we cannot adversely impact water quality. So these are important constraints for when we start putting together plans. This is just, I'm sure you've seen this before. This is the entire watershed. The study will look at the whole watershed, and even though it's a far greater than the lower third of Cosflood Creek. This is a map. I'm sorry, I apologize for the quality. You can see it right here. We brought 2 of those, and what this is I wanted to demonstrate, and you can't really see it very well, but up here at the top in orange and right down here, this is what we understand to date would be the limits of what we call the project area. In other words, we study the whole watershed because we don't want to adversely impact, folks upstream or folks downstream. But our area that we're looking to, for the project, to try to address the flooding damage issue is we're thinking just a little bit north of where Cosgrove Creek hits Highway 12, down to just where it enters Calaveras Creek. So that's our focus area. It doesn't mean that we couldn't have a feature a little bit upstream. It just means that this is the area, again, to emphasize, we have to make sure that when we demonstrate that there are damages, and that if we invest $1 million, that we're going to get at least savings of $1 million. So this is the target area for where we understand there are a lot of damages. What I have with this slide is there was a recon done. A reconnaissance study is a smaller study. It's just the only intent is to show federal interest. And in that document, there were several alternative plans considered. Well, we're going to now do that, but there was very limited funding for recon. We have a lot more funding now, so we're going to do a more conscientious study, more comprehensive look at the creek. And these are the potential alternatives that we would start looking at. One is no action. We always have to do this. What would happen in the future if the federal project is not implemented? If no federal project is implemented. Non-structural. We're required by policy to have at least one alternative that doesn't require any type of physical construction. It could be some minor shaping, could be cleaning, it could be some different, in the case of water bodies that can be controlled, like Hogan Dam, it could be changing the schedule a bit. We always have to investigate whether or not we have a non-structural way of dealing with the problem. We have to, then these two were the two that were pretty much somewhat detailed in the recon study. One was to build a detention alternative, and the other was a retention alternative. These were located somewhere around where the Highway 12 hits Cosflood, around that area. Some other ideas are to channelize Cosflood Creek as needed. This could be a combination of earth, levees, berms, or maybe some areas that might have a concrete channel. Another idea is to divert the peak flows towards New Hogan Lake, probably at some point upstream where S12 is. That's another idea we would look at. Another idea that was talked about was to construct some smaller retention areas where there might be some quote-unquote cheap land upstream, and or maybe along even the creek alignment. This would be something that engineering division would need to suggest about ideas. Some other ideas were to stabilize the channel using biotechnical measures, so fiber rolls, tree branch cuttings, log, root wad, boulder. Some of these I'm not exactly sure how they work, but they are more natural measures that you could incorporate to stabilize the channel. In stabilizing the channel, what you hope to accomplish excuse me, is that you would get an easier flow of water and perhaps avoid some of the backing up. Vertical grade controls, that would be like a drop structure. If you're a very steep drop, if you could install a couple of drop structures throughout in a few places, you might be able to slow down the velocities at least, or maybe this would probably need to be combined with enough area to hold back some water. Flood terraces would help increase channel stability and provide some riparian habitat. Again, these are ideas. And what's here at the bottom is what we're largely having this scoping meeting for, is to hear input, any other ideas that the public may have, or other agencies may have, that we've missed and we probably should take a look at. Okay. Issues and concerns. These are just some things that kind of stand out that we need to be worried about to make sure that we address in our document. And one is this area is well, up to recently has been experiencing a lot of development. And a lot of this development is done in pieces, and it's along the creek. And when you do that, you know, one group might say, well, I'll build this here, and you know, this will protect this area, and it might, you know, I won't damage. But then, if one guy does it up here, another guy does something else down here, what you might end up with is they're not linked, and you may have some serious problems. Whereas up here you might be okay, and up here, but when they're together, the cumulative effects become very difficult to assess, and you could run into trouble. So that's one issue. There's also land use changes that are resulting in increased nutrients into the creek. Excuse me. This has to do with, you know, the additional developments, housing, roads, which the runoff, go into the earth, it just now runs off the roads. And a lot of the housing developments, everybody has lawns, and you put fertilizers, and you use a lot of pesticides, and those things do eventually run into streams. And if you have a lot of nutrients beginning to accumulate in streams, you can get a lot more vegetation from it. And there is some serious issues regarding endangered species. We have to be really careful in the federal action with endangered species. We have laws we have to abide by, and there are some apparently potential red-legged frog habitat within the creek, and it needs to be addressed. We need to investigate. And anything else that, again, another agency or might wish to speak to. Okay, that's my part. I'll turn over what's next to Hill.
Okay, so basically what we're here for to do is to capture your input, and we'll be dealing with interagency input as well. And we'll capture that and get it, so we can look at it and discuss it in a orderly fashion. Then what we have to do as a core, another government requirement, is we have to prepare a detailed project schedule, so we lay out what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, and how long it's going to take. And then for things like the red-legged frog and such, we're going to have to get environmental services contracts in place to do surveys and such, so that we can address the environmental concerns as well. And then we'll develop, more highly develop the preliminary group of alternative plans. And we're going to post interim updates to where we are in the progress on the county website. And we're planning to meet at least monthly, so you'll get updates on monthly. And then we're planning on having another public meeting to bring it all together in front of you all again in about 6 to 9 months. At least that's the game plan right now. And now we can turn it over to y'all for your comments and concerns. Yes.
My name's Al Duncan. I'm a realtor in Valley Springs. I've been kind of involved with the Cosgrove Creek issue for about 35 years. And if you don't mind, I'd rather read this because I might miss some points that we want to bring out. Some of this stuff is addressed here, and I'm just kind of wondering where some of these projects that were thought about 25 years ago are in today's plans. Let's take a look at the real water issues affecting our area. I've been watching these issues for over 35 years. We have two water problems here. One is not enough potable water to support the growing general public. And all you have to do is read the papers today, and you can see water's an issue down in Wallace and stuff, just for new construction. Lake Hogan gets very little snow melt and not enough rain. We also have, on occasion, the issue of too much water in Cosgrove Creek. For years, the creek flooded near the Gold Creek Bridge, which is a low spot on Highway 26. If the creek wasn't cleared out by a group, like prisoners or the Rites of Passage group out of English Camp, there were also beavers that had a dam below Vista del Lago. And we couldn't do anything with them because Fish and Game wouldn't let us go in there and move a beaver dam. And that was one of our problems with the backing up of the water on Cosgrove Creek. Somehow the beavers either decided to leave or they're not there anymore. And a fellow by the name of John Berner bought the property where Gold Creek is now, and he put all that riprap along the one side of it, which is what you're talking about, the erosion and stuff like that. It was very expensive for him. And that was before Gold Creek was even going in there. They were talking about putting in a 400-unit mobile home park in there, or a manufactured home park in there. Now let me remind you, at this time, the creek was being cleared out nearly every year by action of our supervisor at that time, and we didn't have any flooding. And the talk was, and this was with the Corps of Army Engineers involved, that the creek would be deepened and kept cleaned out as houses were added to Gold Creek. Now enters the red-legged frog and another do not touch from the federal government. No more clearing by any group allowed, except last year they allowed a partial clearing, did little if any. They couldn't clear near the bridges where trash collects because something to do with the frog again. Over the years, other ideas were tossed around which did not waste all the water to the delta, but used it. This involved other groups that we had, like this group here, And one idea, it was found that the highest level of water in Lake Hogan was lower than the inflow to Cosgrove Creek at Hogan Dam Road Bridge. So why not pipe the creek water to Hogan Lake and resupply our water supply? It's mostly downhill. The Corps of Engineers owns a large portion of that land that would be needed already, and the rest could be used as utility easement along the road, and few pumps would be needed, and it wouldn't be too expensive. And the other idea was above Highway 12, on the upside of Valley Springs, install water siphons in the creeks to recharge the aquifer that runs down Highway 26 to support the agricultural needs of the valley. Again, less expensive, and the water is not wasted. And both sides do not impact the area of the dreaded red-legged frog.
Well, Mr. Duncan, I do appreciate your concerns, and I do hear you. One of the constraints with this project is it is for flood risk management. Now, what you're talking about is water supply. Some of these things you've talked about, we will look at, but there's also a cost factor involved, and we have to keep that in mind as well, the cost factor and the BC ratio. But we will look at these ideas and vet them out in our.
Some of them were already mentioned in your.
Yeah. Yes, sir?
Copies, printed copies of your slides, your PowerPoint slides?
Actually, we will have them up on the county's website, right, Vicki?
Mhm.
Yes.
And if you,
The county's website?
I'll put them up on the website, put them up tomorrow.
See, if you don't get me 35% match, then this is not a project.
That's when we get to the construction phase. Right now, we're doing a study, okay? We've got the money for the study,
$7 million?
not the full $7 million. This is just a small pot of money,
Oh,
800,000.
yeah, to do the study. The $7 million is the cost of the study and the full construction project. So that's federal money.
Can I address the match?
Yes.
The 35% match from the local share can be in-kind contributions of work, it can be the land, it can be acquired easements, so the match, and it could be a development fee. So the county, when we get ready to actually fund this project, I don't think coming up with a couple $1 million on our side is going to be a significant issue.
Yeah, that's a good point. On the federal side, we just give dollars. On the sponsor side, that match is done with what we call LERDs, which is a real estate right-of-ways, disposal sites, relocations, things like that, and work in kind and things like that. So you guys have more latitude actually on the sponsor side than we do on the federal side in that respect.
so your 65% of $7 million anticipates that the project cost, construction cost, is going to be somewhere $10, $11 million.
Correct.
No.
The full project cost.
7.
That's a cap. It could be, we have a plan that costs $1 million, it could be the best plan cost.
Under this
30
authority, we can only go to 7 million.
Under this authority,
Total
you could,
project is
the most the federal share would be $7 million. And that would have to constitute 65%.
Okay. So it is, I didn't realize, it's the cap on the federal
Cap on
side is
federal.
7 million, so the total
We
project
could have
could
a
be.
$100 million project. I mean, the cap on it is $7 million, you have $20 million. And just as a warning, well, we're not going to headquarters. Headquarters can be really picky sometimes when you present something that's more than what the authority is. We're not going to headquarters, we just want to do it, so. But it's within the purview of headquarters to say this is too much money. But that is unlikely to happen here because it's a division. It makes it a lot easier to do the cap because we're not going to headquarters or to Congress.
Just real quick, another real likely match source, since I mean, at least the beginning projects that we looked at is, if you drive down Hogan Dam Road, you go over the crappy old bridge, down into a little bit of a hole, and you go over another crappy little bridge. Well, we have road impact fees that could be used also as a match. The county has road impact fees, and should be looking at a better alternative for entrance over revenue. So that's another income source that could happen, developer road fees.
Well, and Jeff, I would like to add that we have this in the and the state. So with the federal funding, in all likelihood, the state does come together with its finances and Proposition 84 moves forward, there's a good chance that we can obtain significant state funding to help match the federal funding to lessen some of the out-of-pocket expenses from the county or local landowners.
Jeff, over there.
Let's see, you mentioned, or, yeah, you have, but anyway, I'd like to know, like, the time factor and the cost factor of what is being possibly proposed here as compared to some other alternatives, and what those cost factors might be. And if we're looking at 6 or 8 years and $7 to $50 million, those are the only figures I've seen you guys put up there. I have no idea how much this would cost. I don't know if anybody else does either. But I'm thinking it might be a better deal to go in there and buy these 20 houses that get flooded, or else have them sign something that nobody, the federal government or nobody else is ever responsible if they get flooded, and maybe one business that floods. But I can just look in this room and see, I know a lot of you guys, you people are here, you're trying to do your job and stuff, but you all have jobs that pay more money than what I make, and this is all getting added to the taxpayer's bill. And maybe without going through all of this and worrying about a red-legged frog and what it takes to build a structure that will hold this water in. I live on this creek, and some of these alternatives are being proposed. It sounds good to get this water into Hogan Dam, but when this floods, it floods within a 3 or 4 hour period, and there's no more flooding. If we get a big deluge, all this water comes down at once, you would have big pumps. I've worked on big irrigation systems where they pump water that makes a river, and that wouldn't even hold the amount of water that comes down Cosgrove Creek when it comes. And that's not even counting these other creeks. So I think you should look at some other alternatives first, and possibly purchasing these houses or having them sign a hold harmless agreement, and they could be purchased for, fair market value. There's lots of houses for sale today, and some of these people would be glad to get away from where they are. And if that could happen, they could take down those houses, and they wouldn't have to worry about the flood.
That could be a non-structural alternative, elevated homes and relocated homes, that falls under the non-structural.
And that was one that was looked at the last time, that we'll be looked at again this time. So, yes.
We will be looking at it.
Could be a combination.
Also, on one of those first charts, when you were reading through that about they're going to give this money wherever it's the most needed, I see very little chance of this project ever getting any money. You're going to spend millions of dollars to keep 20 houses from flooding, and some of that, I doubt if the money's ever going to come.
Well, the
By your
reason,
own
the reason
criteria.
for doing I understand your concern, but the reason for doing the document is precisely that, is to demonstrate whether it is or it isn't. If it isn't, then we don't have a project.
But
What you say is true, and it's borne out by the study, then that's it.
Were you going to answer this concern also?
I'd like to address that. It isn't just 20 houses and 1 or 2 businesses along Cosgrove Creek. There's 20 houses just in La Quintina that are impacted. The entire town of Valley Springs is impacted. The mobile home park here that has 75 or 80 residents, they were impacted. They had over 3 feet of water running down their streets. There's a lot of people that are impacted beyond what Mr. Randall has indicated. If we lost the entire shopping center here, I can guarantee you that $25 million they paid for that, those people would be pretty upset.
I don't even think this project is addressing that trailer park.
Yes,
Yes, it does.
It
It is within the footprint.
Yes, it does.
And the Valley Springs sewer pond, which was irrigated.
And it
There's
impacts a
plenty
lot.
there's plenty of reasons to do this, at least to try to find out.
Gal in the blue jacket, did you have a comment? Behind the gentleman in the,
Oh, sorry. It was all related to that I
Is my house flooded?
Yeah.
Yes, I've been flooded.
Aren't you above that, you're above that line, aren't you?
I'm just about a mile above where this project's going to end.
Where it's gonna start,
The
or
one.
in, yeah.
The pair.
Yeah, the beginning, okay. I didn't know you were here, but I was thinking of you guys, you know, when you were talking about the
Part of the reason for looking at the whole study area is that we want to make sure that we're not missing something. I mean, right to this day, what we understand to be the problem area begins more or less at that trail. So we don't, part of the reason for having the whole study area is that we will look and we will study the whole area. We will focus in then on where damages. Engineering will do a head grass model one, and they'll spit out what the inundation is. And they'll be using some, actually my understanding is pretty new, up to date topographic information. So if we use that, we have that available, we should get a pretty good reading about where the problem is. Then we'll sit down and assess where the actual start, where the actual end is.
So, I mean, that wasn't part of my, what I wanted to bring up, but I think that's a good point. I brought up at this last meeting, the issue of, and I'm glad to see it was up on the list, of how Hogan Dam is managed. Not just during flood events, but their schedules, you know, how high the dam, the water can be in January versus November versus April. You know, they have their schedule. And I know that back in, was it 84, 85, when all the damage was done downstream when the walnuts from the groves were taken out, stuff was that 84, 85? It was
86 was the wet year.
86.
During
Was that the year
80s.
when all the groves and stuff were taken out?
I don't know, I was on another river at that time. But 86 is generally one of the wettest years of the century.
Yeah.
But there was, you know, this huge release done then, you know, which caused all that damage, along with all the flooding and stuff. And it's my understanding that then the schedule was changed for how they were going to manage the water level. So I'm wondering if it's time, or if it has already been done, that the schedule be changed. How, and then, so that's one issue. And then we're looking at, as was mentioned at the last meeting, that the reason they had to do that huge release in '06 was because there was 40,000 cubic acre feet per second coming in. And if we're talking about trying to divert more water there now, trying to get pressure off the creek, that's just going to exacerbate the problem of too much water coming in and having to let more water come out. The issue to me, what I observed and brought up at the last meeting was it was confirmed that the Calaveras River acts as a dam for cosflood Creek. Then hence the backing up. And I would venture to say that it would just be very interesting just to do that one change. I'm sure it's a whole lot more complicated than what I see, is managing the dam differently. It was mentioned at the last meeting that the dam was put there for, in part at least, for flood control in Stockton, for Stockton. Now since the dam is there, we have a flooding problem in Valley Springs. And I believe that in part, in the biggest part, a lot of other little things, beaver dams, Cosflood Creek, runoff water into Cosflood Creek, you know, causing more rush roads, you know, that kind of thing. I think Hogan Dam and the management of it is the biggest thing to be looked at.
I'll begin in a second. One of the
reservoir if we do that as well. Our hydrology guys will be looking at that. So,
I mean, again, if you have we already have the situation where there was way too much water coming in and they had to do the releases. So why do we have to do a study about sending more water in there when it couldn't handle the water that was coming in there already? So I'm not suggesting that we divert water to Hogan Dam. I'm saying, I think we already know that that's not an intelligent thing to do.
Well, I'm not I think there was, I'm not from here, but I think I saw where there was a look at the schedule in 2004. Was there a study done?
New Hogan Reservoir Reoperation
Yeah.
Study.
So they did that schedule change in 2004, 2005. They did a study on that. They would have done some modeling.
They did the study or did they make a change? No.
It was a study, I was a part of that. What they were looking at was reoperation of New Hogan to provide additional flows for fish in the lower Calaveras. And that reoperation allows the Corps to exceed its flood control management curve slightly. The Corps keeps a close track on soil moisture conditions within the watershed on a day-to-day basis. And through that soil moisture tracking, they basically know how the watershed responds to new precipitation events. And so they can carefully monitor the water levels in the reservoir, they carefully monitor the soil moisture conditions in the watershed, and they also monitor weather forecasts. So when they see certain conditions occurring, they are forced to modify reservoir operations based on their flood control manual. There's a manual that's 400 pages long that dictates how that reservoir operates throughout the year, how much they can release, how they can change ramping rates in terms of going from high flows to low flows and low flows to high flows. So all of these things are carefully managed by the Corps, but you do end up with what is considered acts of God, where it exceeds the probabilities where a normal person would operate. I mean, in all projects throughout the world, if you can't plan for, say, a 500-year event, because if you did, every ratepayer in this world would be paying their entire salaries to build facilities to protect against those very extreme, rare events. But April 06 was one of those events where it was a very significant, large event that occurred in April. That's typically very late in the rainfall year cycle. Typically, precip storms that are very significant occur from November to, say, February. So according to the flood control manual that the Corps operates by, they're already starting to begin filling the reservoir for the upcoming irrigation, or what they call a conservation season. So you have a delicate battle between the balancing act between protecting downstream interests for flooding, but then at the same time trying to maximize your storage so that people get the water they need to get through these dry summer months in California and now these multi-year drought cycles. So there's a delicate balance there, and I think the Corps does a pretty good job. But responding to your backwater effect, when you do make large releases from the dam, there is somewhat of a backwater effect in Cosgrove Creek. But as this gentleman mentioned, and it's true, Cosgrove Creek ramps up quick, and it also goes down quick. So when you look at what's called a time series hydrograph, that curve is fairly peaky. So that backwater effect, I think, only happens for a small period of time. And I'm not sure. You'd have the engineers can do a HEC-ROS analysis. That's a fancy word for the computer simulation model they do to calculate inundation and flows and so forth. They could probably tell you how far up Cosgrove Creek that potential backwater effect occurs. But I think what we came up, the conclusion we have, and the modeling I've seen, is that the backwater effects from the Calaveras really are not the significant issue. The significant issue is that Cosgrove Creek experiences these flash flood events because of the significant precip and the type of soil conditions in the area, which when you get hit by a series of storms like occurred in April 06, the soils become saturated. So the next day when it rains, there's no more infiltration into the soil. It's all runoff to the creek, and that's why it gets real flashy. And no matter what you do, we even talked about it before, you do channel maintenance and clearing, anything you do, you're still going to get these flash flood events that are going to inundate these homes. And so that's why the Corps has found a federal interest to spend up to $7 million to try to develop a comprehensive solution. So, you know, I think it's important to look at New Hogan Reservoir and backwater effects and channel clearing and buying out certain homes and looking at these various options and alternatives. But the reality is you still have a flash flood problem that has to be mitigated somehow. And I think that through all these ideas, something's going to bubble to the surface that makes the best economic sense for the local area. And one other area we are looking at, because we have heard from landowners upstream of where the mobile home park is located, there may be some areas where we could provide some detention or retention on various land where you would protect the mobile home park upstream of what that map showed, you know, higher in the watershed. Those are some other ideas that local landowners have brought to our attention over the last year or two. I know that's a little bit of a long description, but the New Hogan Dam is an important resource as well. And just responding real quickly to the gentleman who said there's not enough water. There is water for the area. The issue is infrastructure.
Wait just a second. We had an 8-year drought, and we went down to our 16,000 acre.
It's 15,000 acre feet.
Yeah, and our water at our taps and houses was gray.
Yeah.
So don't say it.
We operate differently now.
Yeah, that was 16 years ago.
That's right.
And we do have a state-of-the-art treatment plan. And yes, in a long drought, we do have to be careful. And that's why there's this delicate balance between protecting flooding and trying to protect for long-term droughts. Because who knows how long this current drought we're in is going to last.
Thank you. Ashley, the young man, you on that question.
Just wondering if the level of environmental analysis that you do, if that factors into the cost benefit analysis? So if you do an EA as opposed to an EIS, does that help the case?
No, it doesn't change the cost sharing for the county. The only reason you're talking about study costs are different from project costs. So we can have study costs. We can have study, do all the modeling, get all the work done, pay staff, to prepare the documents, send them out. So there's study costs. We have the project cost, which is the $7 million cap on the federal side, and the cap corresponding to 35% cap on the sponsor side. But in terms of the EA versus the EIS, our study costs would cost us more to do the study, because it's going to take us longer, and we'll have more issues to address. So it might be some problems that would cost us more money for the study. It doesn't necessarily translate into more project. I'm not sure that answers your question.
And it doesn't help the economics, it's for environmental impact, if that's your question.
Right, I mean, I guess you transfer the burden of proof whether you do an EIS or an EA from the federal government to Challenger. So I was just wondering if in that cost-benefit ratio that there was some calculation for, you know, having a lesser degree of the stuff.
The only thing that might be would be if you, no, I mean, really, no, I would say the answer would be no. I don't know.
Yeah, strictly just the value of the benefits over the cost of the project, and the environmental is not even in that equation.
I mean, it would be in it in a different way. Say, you know, if we, like I said earlier, if we had a problem and Fish and Water Service didn't mind that we mitigated for it, and then our particular plan might require us to construct.
Well, that's
say,
part of the construction.
Then that becomes part of the project cost. So then, you know, it's part of the cost. So the cost, you know, the denominator is bigger. You know, your benefits in that sense, environment, whatever might factor into the project costs in that sense, but not in the sense of doing an EIS or.
Yeah, but the EIS is before that calculation and that restructure.
But
Yeah,
you were,
you might end up having to mitigate in either an EA or an EIS.
Yeah.
In relation to the environmental work, there's been college level water district we did a study of the actual project area, or one of the proposed project areas. Is any of that information helpful to you? Can it bring the feasibility cost down? I mean, there's a 2,000 unit subdivision stream on Cosflood Creek that did some environmental work. Is any of that helpful to get up there? You have to do all new stuff.
I don't know.
These are fairly recent studies.
I don't know. The answer is I haven't seen it, so I can't assess it. But it really is not my area of expertise. It would be falling more along the environmental leads and the resource agencies that deal with the environment. Their acceptance of how comfortable they're accepting that information. But I mean, we would certainly look to whatever information, any technical information anyone has that can be used as a way to, yeah, if it's usable, we don't have to pay for it. We just use it. Like I understand DTM digital terrain model, topo is state of the art in the whole area. Well, hey, if we can get that, we don't have to worry about paying for a survey. So whatever information, but it's kind of incumbent upon whatever discipline it is, like the environmental side or the engineering side, to assess, whether or not we can use it in the document. But certainly, it's all welcome.
Pardon me?
Are you meaning like past reports like?
No, we did it for Sprayfield. We did environmental work for Sprayfield on that site, which is also, when we talk about projects, that still has to be one of the considerations.
Surveys?
We're,
Did surveys around for the spray fields?
yeah. And that's right smack in the middle of what we're talking about. Doing this.
Yeah, if they're, it depends on what kind of survey, like for the red-legged frog or something. We did those, and it's a protocol that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service requires, then that's acceptable. If there's the sources listed, and everything's certified, then that's definitely a money saver. It's already done. It takes a lot less time to put the whole EA together. So, less time and less money for the environmental person, labor costs.
Who will coordinate, will there be like a list of the things that we're going to study? Can I go out to the responsible agencies to see if they have any information, any current information, and get it back to you to say, this is helpful or it's not?
Well, normally, environmental leads get together, and they usually include Fish and Wildlife Service, we already have the Fish and Game Commission, whoever, and then we have the Corps, and they get together to assess the environmental information, just as the engineers and hydrologists and everyone else would get that. So, in terms
Could you
of
all
what's needed.
speak up, please?
I'm sorry.
Could you speak up?
Oh, okay.
We can't.
I apologize. What I was saying was that, what was I saying?
You're saying that the environmentalists will get together, the environmentalists will get together. What I'm asking is that will you guys give the county and perhaps water district heads up, and also allow us to be at the meetings to see
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
if
of
there's
course,
any information that we have that can bring.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're all part of the team, yeah.
And I don't know if, directly, I don't think that those reports would bring project costs down as far as like when we go into feasibility, we're looking at this alternative costs this much. And it's like, oh, well, we have a survey for the spray fields, so therefore this alternative will cost less with spray fields.
No, I would just, I think if it
Yeah,
saves money, it doesn't matter where it's saved.
I think what you're getting at is your
What
time
time?
contribution, if you can use that towards your in-kind. If the information is useful, can you then say, this is part of my income? I think that's what you're talking to. And certainly if the information is useful, we would like it. The other part as to how it fits, I'm not the project manager, that's to figure out how the in-kind is set up and how they, I'm not sure how that would work. You know, of course, a sponsor will always do that. They'll say, I have this, it costed me $10. Can you use it? If you can use it, can I get like $10 as an income? That's, sponsors always do that. There's nothing wrong with that. But I don't know the mechanics of how, you know, Project Management assesses that information and decides how much of that in kind. But we certainly are looking for whatever information might give used that we would think we would need, and that we could save some money and not care.
First of all, the gentleman.
I just wanted to remind everybody that during that event in '06, we also had an issue with the upper lake in the Rocky County Golf Course. If I remember, we had state OES there. They were concerned about that dam being ready to fail. Had that water come down at exactly the wrong time, that would have been pretty catastrophic also. I don't know if you were aware of that, but that was going on exactly the same time as the flood.
They thought if that dam fell, it would have come into that lower lake, which is right behind the maintenance shack. And then it would go across the street and stuff, and the creek couldn't handle it.
I think they ended up with a bunch of guys from the Valley COCDF strengthening the dam somehow. I don't know if they were putting the sandbags in there, but that was ongoing effort for like 2 or 3 days. I had a friend who lived on the cul-de-sac when they kind of come to.
I think that was Peter staging. Yeah, you know, I know '06 that's when my property was affected. But I know that the house right across the creek from me has over, 20 years, I mean, I don't know how long the house has been there, but I know that they flooded 3 or 4 times, in the last 10 years, so. I brought up about, my place, but I'm just as concerned about the other thing that I had been thinking about is this 55-acre retention pond that we're talking about. And again, I don't know all of the impacts, but that might help us, those of us downstream now. But my concern is once, new commercial buildings go in, once the 2,000 or 3,000 homes that are slated for, I think it's the Lime Creek area, will that, it seems to me that that retention pond that we thought was going to help those of us downstream will really end up benefiting the people, the new development that comes in. I don't think 55 acres is enough. It sounds like a lot, but I don't think it's enough to protect all of us.
One of the things you'll notice is that map over there, all those light green areas are proposed developments that we know about all this time, because one of the things we have to look at is what is happening in the community, what is planned over the life, over a
Planning horizon.
That's a planning horizon of what, 50 years?
We use 50 years. The decision to make a plan is when you compare what's the future in 50 years if you don't build a federal project, compared to what do you do, what happens in 50 years if you do build Plan A, Plan B, Plan C, or Plan D. So that's how the decision is made, comparing the future. We don't compare to existing. So if there's a development, the reason that that's up there is that we want to make sure that we capture in our study whatever developments have already been permitted or are likely to occur in within that time.
Yeah.
Realizing that we can't predict the future, we do the best we can with the information we have today. As an example, I don't know if it is or not, but say one of these is already permitted and the developer already has the drawings, well, we consider that pretty much a done deal in the next 5 to 10 years. So we consider that a future. It's in our future. So when we do say a head cross and the run, the model runs, we have to somehow place it in.
David, you want to add to that?
Well, it's more a question because I haven't been through this process either myself, but we're in the middle of a general plan update. And I'm wondering, when you're looking 50 years out, if rather than just look at where there's projects in the hopper right now, if we look at, well, what are the land use designations that the county's saying they want to do there, because that could be substantially more, or maybe not, of where potential development might be. So, because no one's asking for any of that information yet.
We will be.
Okay.
I'm concerned about the maintenance components of the different alternatives. And if you will be developing potential scenarios and then what the protocols would be.
Yeah, each alternative plan that we come up with, it has, whatever it is, a structure. The maintenance, the O&M, what we call operation and maintenance. Operation also, not just the maintenance, is factored into the project. The economists take that, they do their magic, and they come up with what the value is of that. So if you have an alternative that is cheap to build, but costs a ton of money to maintain, those costs are factored into the decision making.
Okay, and the other part of the question, in terms of the protocol, because that's the issue we're running into. And I know maintenance is not on the table tonight, totally understand that. But the protocol for doing the maintenance, so that when we, the county, go to do the maintenance, or
Okay.
whomever the agency is, that
Yeah.
those protocols are
What we
in
do
place.
when we build a typical core project is we design it, we build it, we develop it, what we call an O&M manual, and we turn it over to the local to run and do the operation. So there will be a manual, there will be a plan for how it should be operated and maintained. Does that answer your question?
Well, and it's bought into by the participating agencies.
Correct.
Okay.
And it's bought off not only by the folks taking over the responsibility, it's bought into by Fish and Wildlife Service, the regulatory, all regulatory stuff.
Great.
And that's really important, because what that is a plan to continue to maintain the creek also, or it should be in this case.
That's what they've said.
We'll have a long, what I understand is that we'll have a 10-year plan if we construct this thing on maintaining down below. I mean, certainly that will be part of our study.
Well, I'm really reluctant to, we would need to see, because the federal government would participate in the project, and a maintenance and operation cost of that particular plan. But, if you're like, say, just off the top of my head, if it's something that's further downstream away that requires maintenance, well, that's not
Well, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is we're going to have authority to go and clean the creek out. We will have the buy-off on Fish and Wildlife on how to maintain flood area.
If that's part of the operations maintenance manual, yeah.
Because that's been a problem. It's not that we will, it's getting the authority.
Yeah.
I'd like to just talk about your $800,000 project here. It's $800,000 federal money, no local match required, I understand.
No, it's both.
There's local
That
match,
$800,000 is federal and non-federal together.
there is a match to the $800,000?
County put up $404,000.
So 50% match roughly?
Yeah, because feasibility costs are cost share 50/50.
And as a result of that $1.2 million, the products are going to be a report of some kind, I assume?
It's 800 total.
It's 800.
It's 800
It's
total.
800 total.
50% of that was from the county.
Oh, so it's 100% match.
No,
And 50%.
well, I know what he's saying.
Yeah, okay, I got
It
it.
depends
Gotcha.
on what
The total cost, the total cost is
study cost is
$800,000.
800,000, they gave that.
So the products are going to be a study of some kind for $800,000. A study of some kind. You're going to look at the environmental, or prepare the necessary environmental document. I don't see that specifically said up there, but I assume you're going to prepare the environmental document as a result of this study.
Environmental assessment.
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
environmental assessment or worst case EIS.
But you're
But
going
we're
to
aiming
prepare
to
the
do.
environmental
Yes.
document,
Yes.
okay? And then the hopefully after the discussion of all the various alternatives, you will come up, it doesn't say that either, with a selected alternative, right, on which you prepare the document.
Correct.
And,
You've been through this process before?
yes.
Okay.
And since you have a local match of some kind, I don't see where in there where it says secret, because the local agency also is obligated to adopt a secret document of some kind.
They did
Correct,
say
we
that.
did touch on,
Gary.
we did touch on the
Well, I
sequence.
mean, on that list right there.
It was touched on further back.
And where it says prepare detailed project schedule, when will that be prepared?
That's part of, these are all the things we're going to accomplish before we come back before y'all in 6 to 9 months.
When will that be prepared? That detailed project schedule?
That's a project schedule, that's an internal core schedule that tells us how we're going, the steps we're gonna take, who's gonna do them, and how much.
Yeah, what we're gonna do is we're gonna,
Engineering has to run a model.
Right.
So that schedule
We don't
is,
need to go through all this, but
Mark,
the answer is, or the question is, when will that project schedule be available we can look at? Because it says the next meeting is 6 to 9 months from now. What happens in between? Are we gonna see any kind of a schedule that says you'll do this in the next 2 years or 5 years? Or however long it takes you?
as for when it will actually be accomplished, we're gonna get the entire team together again after we, so we can digest what y'all have said here. And that is part of what we're gonna do, is decide what we need to do, how we need to do it, when we're gonna do it. And that's how we build our schedule, okay? So that's the next basic phase of what we're gonna do.
And when will that be completed?
Within hopefully the next month or two.
Oh, okay.
And then as we do the monthly updates, you guys can see progress as to where we're at in getting through the feasibility study.
So the next couple of months, you said a month or two, the next couple of months or so, there will be a schedule, because you said one of the things you developed is when things get done.
Yeah,
Thank you.
way in the back of the blue.
Are there any similar successful projects that we're looking at here that we might be able to reference and get some hope? I'm sure we're not reinventing the wheel.
We're not reinventing the wheel. We are looking at other similar projects, both at this particular authority level and some of the bigger, what we call GI, which are the bigger flood control projects, looking at what other folks have done to see where we can apply that on the scale that we have.
We're lacking a lot of models in this, for this watershed right now, which is time-consuming.
Yeah, but we do have other similar projects throughout throughout the state, basically. And we share information with within our district and with our other sister districts with the core. So, does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Okay.
If oil and gas development standards can maybe factored in there somehow in this situation, doing studies and various alternatives for the future.
I'm not quite sure I understand what you mean.
Well, in fact, development standards as far as bioswale and different methods of permitting the pavement and how it affects runoff from future development into the creek. You know, if you are looking at the development that is going to be occurring into the creek, it can be developed in different ways. In some ways are more water runoff, criminal law.
Are you?
We don't have any say in what the developers do, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's outside of our purview.
But we can, in our project, offer a lot of restoration components that, like maintenance on the creek, that will be a little more sustainable, like getting rid of weeds and putting in natives, making more areas for the water to go. So that's pretty much on our end, grazing management upstream, because that's really detrimental to what happens downstream. That riparian corridor where the cattle are grazing all through the water, that degrades the stream there, and then there's the intact areas are actually the lower third. There's a good riparian corridor, but according to a restoration plan that was done a little while ago, if there's more development, that starts degrading the channel there, which makes flooding worse. restoration, but it's proven that restoration measures do reduce those impacts. So I'm not sure if we get our project done first, then the developers can't do anything around the corridor. But then again, we don't have funds from developers either for
The county
county
can
cost share.
it's certainly something the county is required to develop, is that they're required people to create a study of their impacts on the floods.
That they have to
So
require
they're-
that.
they're certainly gonna have to recognize that being significant.
Modeling can incorporate LID technologies. It just depends on whether or not the Corps is able to include that in their ecological analyses. Because they basically, and I'm speaking on their behalf because I used to do that modeling, you look at runoff and permeabilities and there's various coefficients that they play around with within the model that can directly or indirectly incorporate some of those LID techniques. But I'm not sure that's within the core scope.
That's what I was asking, within your scope to look at those impacts as it is built out.
But, I'll work with them and we'll see what we can do to include some of those as part of some of the alternatives. Or even construction.
I think it's important that we, and you brought up some points earlier that were vital too about 3.1 inches of rainfall per hour, April of 06. It doesn't matter if it's asphalt or soil or grass, it's going to run off.
Yeah,
It's always been saturated, doesn't matter. Development standards are already in place. I mean, they probably weren't years ago when some of these homes were built in the floodplain, but there are standards that require that a new developer cannot increase the velocity of discharge from his site that presently exists. So they're having to build retention areas and mitigate their impacts upstream of where they're impacted. So there are some standards that are already in place to address those issues. You can always improve on it. You can always add things, but I think that those standards are already in place.
Good point.
Just to follow up on Gary's question real quick, so the county will get some kind of CEQA document, so it'll be a joint NEPA CEQA document? Because any local funds that we put towards the project will have to have CEQA, or will that have to be attained separately, that won't be included as part of it?
It's my understanding that the county would provide a CEQA analysis that we would over what the NEPA requires, and then we can either do kind of a joint document, call it an EA and a whatever CEQA EA equivalent is, but or the county just does their own CEQA document. But
We're going to look into that more. That question's come up.
a lot of the time we do the same one document and it covers both.
Yeah, makes sense.
And then just one quick follow-up to that, are we just competing then with projects in our district? So you said this was going to the district, or are we
This is a
competing
nationwide, the Continuing Authorities Program is a nationwide program that covers 10 legislative authorities, this being one of those 10. So within this authority, we have, what was that, $50 million a year that we compete for within that authority throughout the nation. So
That's 50 million, that's, if I'm not mistaken.
That's annually.
That's annually, and that, I don't believe if you, I guess if you do, I'm not quite sure if they appropriate the entire amount of the project. You know what I'm saying? You could have more than, if you have 10 projects that are $10 million, it's $100 million. But, there's a 2-year time frame for construction, or you can.
They'll probably.
I'm not really sure about that.
First, because the design will be the next
yeah,
phase, and we won't know how much the project will cost until we get the design, and then we go back and ask for.
yeah. When we send our requests up, we say we can use, this is what we're planning to do, break out the cost of each of those, and they'll allocate the money.
Well, Jeff, this study will develop a preliminary design. That's how they calculate the benefit-cost
Yes.
ratio.
Okay,
So
so
you'll
then
have
we'll come up with we'll have
it'll be like a 20% design.
so in our next phase, will be to finish the design,
Yeah.
which is where we'll go with lobby for money for that. I can't imagine we would lobby for money for
We're
construction.
sending
without
you to
design.
Washington to do that, Jeff.
What's that?
Sending you to Washington to do that.
Great, thank you.
He does a good job there.
And you guys go up your chain through your Congress, and we go through our chain through the administration, and we try to talk the same language through both chains so that we're working towards the same goal. So we're very much in communication on schedule and all of that sort of stuff.
Do you have any idea how many concurrent studies, competitive studies are going on concurrently right now
Off the top of my head, no.
across the country? Well, wouldn't that be something to understand, to find out how, what we're up
I
to?
will say, of the 10 legislative authorities, one is severely impacted, and it is not this one. It is what falls under ecosystem restoration, which is a section 206. So you don't see a lot of ecosystem restoration projects right now moving very fast because we're all competing for a lot of money under that authority. This one has less competition, but what type of competition, I honestly don't know at the moment, but I can find out.
Can you provide us with a list of projects of this scope, similar scale, that have been completed? I can tell you, I can talk to you about two. Murray Creek, which is down in Southern California. I can't tell you exactly the town, but I probably have, it's kind of how we got down this path from our consultant from DC. She had been successful in that. Also, well, Jeff, can we find out what that town is? Well, yeah, I'll do that for you. Actually, I don't have it right here with me. Yeah, well, I'm just asking. I'd like to know so we can talk to the people in those communities and find out how this project
There's the
goes.
Russian River too, they had a similar project that Core worked on.
Russian River?
Yeah.
And we also did it falls under section 205 in Tehama up on the Sacramento, but what we did there was we raised houses. But that was another successful project, same authority that we just finished, and that was in our own district, so. But the other ones I can get information from our sister district, that falls under San Francisco district, those two projects that you just mentioned.
After the 2006 flood, I had a couple gentlemen come to my business. Like some of the rest of you, I lost 2 businesses that day, not one, but 2. And after that flood, I had the fortunate meeting with a couple of retired Army Corps of Engineers gentlemen who came to my business, and we got together. I had gone to the county, gotten the total maps for the area, and I asked them just for the heck of it, look over this and tell me what you think. Could we accomplish, protecting our properties and the people in the community by just simply deepening Cosgrove Creek from, say, the mobile home park area all the way to Silver Rapids? Those 2 gentlemen went up to their room and they looked over those maps for the next couple of days, and they came back. Both of them told me, in their opinion, not only was that a good idea, but it was an excellent idea because the topography allowed for it. There would be virtually no maintenance because we're not building a dam or berms or something that have to be maintained. And in the long term, that would take care of the runoff for the foreseeable future until other measures might be taken by developers upstream and so forth to mitigate any kind of impacts that they might have. And they said that it was probably the most cost-effective way to go. Short term would be quicker, and it would also be less money to maintain over the years. Now, we've all talked about our properties that have been impacted. There's a lot of us in this room that lost a lot of money, lost a lot of value in your property and so forth, but there's a far bigger pressure to me here than just what's happening to, maybe $10 or $15 million in real estate. Yes, that's important, but what about the lives of people that could be lost because Highway 26 is flooded And I would dare say, if Mr. Randall's wife was having a heart attack and no one could get to her to give her the needed medical attention, and she died, I don't think, you know, the dollars would even figure in there. And that's what I saw, that's what I had seen could be the potential of the loss of life in this community, whether it was one child or one wife or one husband, because we can't get emergency vehicles through there. Now, that's not just something that happens every 500 years. That happens every few years. The potential here is someone's going to die because we can't get things moving over this red-legged frog crap. It's just ridiculous that people do not count as important as a bug. It's ridiculous that we have our firemen, our ambulances, our sheriff's department having to be rerouted if they can even get through because Hogan Dam Road is flooded as well. They can't do their job, they can't protect us, they can't save our lives. And I think that there needs to be a real emphasis on the safety factor put on getting something done in an expeditious manner before someone does in fact lose their life over it.
One thing I just want to say, I think that cutting a deeper channel has also to do with water quality, and we have to go through permitting processes for that. So it's not just the red-legged frog that is going to stop the problem, but it's also another hoop to go through is the water quality board. They would not. The soil is highly erodible, so deepening the channel and basically cutting into the channel, that just makes it more erodible, more sediment goes downstream. And
that's why they had Mr. Werner riprap. It's, you know, as long as you're spending a potential developer's money, I guess it's of no issue. You know, water resources, Department of Fish and Game, whatever, anybody will go along with that. But that's what broke the first developer on Gold Creek, was they came in after his permits were issued and after he started his development. And these same agencies that are now saying you can't touch this creek required him to do all that work that was done there.
Let's just keep looking forward.
Well, I am trying to look forward, but we
This
got
gets so
also
frustrating when people sit here and they talk about, you know, all the ideas, you know, we are finally at that point where we're gonna have the people in authority begin to study and come up with a solution, and we'll do our best to lobby it with our legislators to try to build the damn things. You know, I will say, I'm actually quite offended by the naysayers here. You know, this is an opportunity for us to fix something, and it's the best opportunity we've had. You know, I mean, let's stop complaining and push it forward.
An emergency plan too, which I don't know if the county does that for their report, or if that's it's a non-structural measure for alternatives, is doing emergency plan, emergency management plan. But yeah, I mean, this is definitely something that our economists even are just, you know, just doesn't make, so one of the things that just doesn't make sense with the world is that they can't put into the cost of life into our projects. And I don't know, you know, I guess one, like a non-structural measure is
Well, an early warning
emergency
system,
management plan.
but an early warning system for flash flooding incidences might be a little harder. I mean, we'll certainly be looking at deepening the channel, and, you know, it's gonna be a lot more, it's a lot more complicated than it would seem on first look. Because if you start deepening, you can't deepen it, just go down straight, we have to be concerned about your slopes. Once you go deeper, you're gonna have to slope it up to make it stable, which means you're gonna eat away land on both sides. It's not that, you know, we have to have engineering look at that, but it's certainly an alternative that sounds like something we wanna look at, so it should be.
One thing Dean brought up that's important is, I mean, I don't know if there's gonna be money to raise any of the roads in the area that may, because there is really, it's a pretty small little stretch there.
Yeah.
But
That's another problem. The other problem with deepening is bridges. I mean, if you deep in at the bridges, you've got supports at the bridges, you can't just tinker with those. You're gonna have to, if you wanna leave that bridge in place, if you can, you're gonna have to provide some sort of structural reinforcement or protection for the piers. It can add significantly to the cost. You're gonna probably have, I mean, at first glance,
Replacing those bridges are just
it might,
expensive anyway, right? I mean,
and,
that's
you
definitely
know,
something I would say.
Believe
but
it
it's
can.
certainly,
Bridges,
it's
but-
certainly something we could include as to look and see, and if we make it, you know, we'll make an early assessment, it might, you know, it might fall off, but it certainly would need to be looked at.
Well, perhaps the
You
county
know,
can do that also. The county
I can tell you that I've seen the Corps struggle with how to assess human life. You can't put a dollar amount on human life, and all these studies are predicated on benefit cost ratio.
I understand. My point was, it's a safety issue, and I was told by a FEMA representative that one of the things that gets attention to an area and gets federal dollars is to point out the safety issues. And we certainly have major safety issues in the wintertime, because you can't just detour around. Hogan Dam Road's flooded, and so is Highway 26. If someone is in trouble in La Quintina or Rancho, they cannot get to them. And it was a FEMA representative, as opposed to being a naysayer, he said put emphasis on that. That is one of the things that makes them set up and pay attention.
And we can include that, but we cannot use it in the cost benefit analysis, I will agree with that. But we can include it in our assessment of the project.
Of safety.
What we can
Life
do.
safety, yes, life safety is a big thing.
What we can do, the only thing that monetarily you have is the additional cost of the county of putting ambulances or a helicopter out there. Those things you can probably, because those things you can count. You know, but no one is gonna touch, well, so-and-so is worth, you know.
Yeah,
You
no,
know,
I
no one-
understand
there's no
that.
way to do that. No one's gonna touch that. The only thing that can be done is that, and, you know, certainly it's a red flag. I think that it works from that part, but that's just, you know, there's no way to incorporate it into the study in terms of assessing the value.
No, it's just to stress there is a safety issue there. It's not just property.
I would just want to say to that, I've been doing a lot of the FEMA stuff for the county the last year or so. And first off, FEMA thinks about flooding a lot different than the Army Corps, and safety is a much bigger deal for FEMA. And so all I want to say is that some of you may be aware that a few months ago, the board made a decision to adopt the Department of Water Resources flood awareness areas into our regulated floodplains, and those will be coming out with our new FEMA maps sometime probably in the spring or summer. But in exchange for doing that, FEMA said they put into their budget $1 million to do not necessarily fix problems, but to do the detailed study of areas. And where those studies are going to be done in the county are yet to be determined. But FEMA is going to be kicking off, hopefully in the next month or so, a series of their own meetings to look around the county, where should this $1 million be spent? And that's probably where you can voice your opinion about safety as well. And one of the things they've already talked about is, even though the Cosgrove Creek area, the study area, they did a detailed study there when the first FEMA maps came out in, I think, 1989. The maps came out in 1990. But there has been a lot of work in there because of Gold Creek Estates and the levee and the filling, and there's some paperwork going through FEMA now that will probably take Gold Creek Estates out of the floodplain because the whole area was raised high enough to be above it, according to FEMA. But they think that it may be worthwhile to do another study of it now with the newer information and the more technology we can put towards it and get a better picture of it. And so I don't know how this would work. That may be something that could be used as a cost share, maybe not, because it's more federal money. So just so you know, there's another avenue coming up where that I think the safety is part of their purview more than maybe the core, this particular kind of project with the core, which is really just looking at a long-term solution of flooding. And while it would provide safety benefits, it doesn't sound like it's something that their process is designed to address directly.
Right, we would not direct, you're right, we would not address it directly, but we could put the concern there and point out that when these two areas are flooded at the same time, there's a major issue for life safety, for safety egress. I mean, we can include that. Thank you.
In the next 6 months or so, people here think of additional questions or further information, people on the able to even contact information.
Yes, and we'll provide that on the county website as well.
Well, just a comment. My building was built above the then known floodplain, according to FEMA. And it's just very frustrating to say, okay, now Gold Creek is going to be out of the floodplain, because they were told to build up so high, and so they're clear. And so we just keep, it's just very frustrating. This building was tons of dirt, was brought in to put my building above. It's higher than Highway 26, higher than flooding had ever occurred.
Well, I can just quickly address that. And I did bring some of the FEMA literature back here you guys can pick up and take out. There's a lot of information there, and that directs you to even more information on their website. But what people don't always understand is that the FEMA floodplains, it's not designed to prevent you from flooding if you're outside of them. They're saying that we're marking as best we can where there's a 1% chance of flooding in any 1 year. But if you get into their information, they'll tell you that this does not mean if you're outside of this, you're not going to flood. It's an insurance program, basically. So they're playing the odds. They're saying that if you stay out of here, or if you're in here and you build these standards, you reduce your risk of flooding. They don't say you won't flood. And so they encourage you, A, don't build in their designated floodplains, period, unless you have no alternative or it's really worth it to you to do that. And B, if their floodplain ends here and you've got a big enough property, get well away from it. Don't just get just out of it, because then you don't have to meet the regulations of building in it. So I think it's just something to be aware of. The intention of the FEMA maps is really to assist people with insurance in areas that are likely to flood. It's not really designed to tell you if you build here, you will flood. If you build here, you won't flood. There's a lot of gray area in between, and you build as high as you can.
I want to just say opinion. I think I want to. My feelings are I'm grateful that you're here. You're a partner that is offering to pay 65% of a problem that currently exists and has been here for years. And I know there's work of CCWD and the county to get you to come here and help us with this. There's a lot of people here who are concerned. They all have their own interests, and it's understandable. They all have emotions about losing their property and the dangers that occur. But what I'd like to say is these people aren't the people who brought the red-legged frog. That's Fish and Wildlife. That's a whole separate issue. They're just having to deal with it just like we are. And if there's anybody that can help us, it's the federal government. So these are our friends, and I think we need to hear that.
Yeah, I'd like to, you got problems and you have solutions, right? And problem, solution. But up in solution, because these are periodic rainfalls, right? If we can just contain it for a little while, things are going to clear out, we can release it, or it'll release itself because it has such and such a level that it comes to. There's plenty of open ground up here. The terrain appears to be outlined.
I'm not a surveyor, I'm not an engineer, but the terrain appears to me that it could hold quite a bit of water for a short amount of time. It would rain off, it would come down, it all goes down the creek like it's supposed to do without going where it's not supposed to go. But there's a red-legged frog up here. Now, I don't know if this red-legged frog has the amount of impact that it seems that it's having on all of this area. And I'm just wondering, does anyone in this room feel like the federal government has proven that their number one is a red-legged frog up here?
I don't think that they've said that there is. They're saying that it's a potential habitat for red-legged frog, is the latest that I have heard from Fish and Wildlife. So it is pretty much on us to prove that it isn't there. Or if it is there, then you're going to go down two different paths with that. So it's potential red-legged habitat, and there has been, I think, some private sightings of some, but there hasn't been any that I have been aware of that has been surveyed and found.
Have you seen a federal agent with a red-legged frog in his hands?
Have not yet.
Don't you think that because of all these problems, we deserve to see a Fed with a red-legged frog in his hands or her hands?
He might drop it.
I'm just wondering about this. This is ludicrous that there's all of this space up here that we could use. And yet, we seem to not, we've not even discussed this because, we're not talking about it because of the frog? Why aren't we looking at retention, detention?
Because of the area of impact that we're looking at for the flooding issue.
But this is where the water waits.
Understood. You see the other yellow map over there?
The yellow map.
The yellow map.
Okay.
That is the entire study area, okay? That's the area we're studying. This map over here is the area we would actually be doing the work in because that's where the flooding issues exist.
But if you do the work where the flooding exists, wouldn't it make more sense to do a little bit of work further upstream and hold that water for a short amount of time with maybe that much soil?
We have considered that. It's in the list of potential alternatives. To
Good.
consider
Good, because it seems minimal to me.
And were you here at the maintenance meeting at all?
I was here at the first, at a meeting, what, 3 months ago, 2 months ago, something like
No,
that?
last month, Mr. Monk spoke about the requirement of the survey for the red-legged frog and all of that we
Yes.
have to go through whether you
I was
need to-
definitely here for that.
Okay, you were here for that. Part of what we will do, what we would need to do for this study anyway, is do that survey.
Who does that survey for the red-legged frog?
We would have to contract that out to a certified person like Jeff, like Monk and Associates.
But we will be doing it.
Yes.
See, that's something I think we need to recognize. One of the reasons is, the county hasn't been able to do it, but we're actually gonna do that stuff.
Good.
And so, I mean, that's gonna be an impediment gone. I mean, if you find the red-legged frog, it doesn't mean you can't do anything. You know, you just have to mitigate. You know, I mean, red-legged frogs aren't gonna stop the world from turning around. We just have to mitigate.
Correct.
Yeah, so I mean, that is one issue that is going to be studied and dealt with in this, so.
Well, hopefully we won't find
Well, we didn't find anything on our side.
if we do find one, it could be very problematic. Very problematic. Fish and Wildlife Service has to be
Mitigation, plan on, but.
They
That
can
has
just
to be
prove
the
that.
spring out
So
there.
hopefully it won't. Hopefully there's somewhere else.
Any other questions or comments?
Thanks.
Thank you all for caring enough to come out to this meeting. I have, not on these types of issues, but I have been on your side of the table in public meetings on other types of issues, and I know the feelings run strong, and you want to be heard and all of that, and I appreciate you all taking the time to come out here, be heard, and make note. We will do the best we can with this, our authorities, to mitigate this problem.
I think it's a wrap.
Ernest had